Welcome along, everyone. I was at a really interesting event last Thursday and got some real good content that I really want to share with those out there that are interested in the property market. This event was brought to you by Dr. Andrew Wilson. So he's a chief economist, and he really went back and looked at all the facts and figures related to property, migration, immigration, etc., to have a bit of a look at what's happened in the past in the Australian property market, but more importantly, give us a bit of a guide at what's lying ahead over the next few years. I know there's a lot of confusion out in the market right now. We should definitely not be listening to the media. They've got it wrong many times in the past. They really sensationalize one little factor, one little bit of information. But what we want to do is step back and take a broad, overall view of the information so we can actually really make a good educated decision on what's really happening in the market here. Dr. Andrew Wilson there, very chief economist, very well qualified, as you can see there. He was the chief economist at the Domain Group for many years and has been leading a lot of other companies over the past as a chief economist. He's currently got his own property research data information company called My Housing Market. And he produces these very detailed, very good reports on a very regular basis. And it's about understanding the whole information that we can take in and then make good educated decisions. So we're going to cover some really good content in this presentation today. For those that are not really sure about the market or want to understand it better, it's absolutely gold information. As you can see there, Andrew Wilson was very well qualified, quite often featured. Capital housing markets, we're going to have a look at what's happening around in the past and also, more importantly, what's going to happen over the next few years. Dr. Andrew Wilson's gone on record as saying he's expecting to see house prices rise in capital city in Australia in 2023. So again, very different from what we hear from these sensationalized news articles. So again, just go back to the facts and information. Macroeconomic forces, they're the key drivers of the housing market. It's not just one factor or one statistic, which again, a lot of people focus on. It's the overall statistics and making a good educated decision. We're looking at the immigration, we're looking at the housing supply, and then we're looking at the general state of the economy. So people into Australia, migration, houses, how is construction going, and how are interest rates affecting the economy. So we see there interest rates obviously at much higher levels than we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years, but stepping back and looking back in history, and when we're averaging property out, and generally most property owners and investors owning the properties for that longer term growth have seen in the past, we've seen lots of natural and monetary disasters, but the property market has continued to climb. And we've seen the previous instance where interest rates were much higher, about double what they currently are. And you can see that the property markets, the capital cities in Australia were always growing over the long term. Sure, there was periods where the property market declined and a long flat period, but generally the longer term growth and average growth was very strong right around Australia. Interest rates we know are really higher than they have been for the last couple of years. And we have had many rate rises, but we are starting to see those rate rises in intensity. And many economists are expecting those to stabilise later in the year. But when you're doing the cash flows, yes, they're expecting maybe another couple of rate rises in the next months and then expecting them to stabilise and drop off over the longer term. The economy, surprisingly enough, the Australian economy is very strong, as reported by Dr. Andrew Wilson, and the statistics backing that show that GPT growth is very strong. Unemployment, jobless rates at historical low levels. So most people that want a job have got a job, and that's giving everyone good income, helping insulate us against those higher interest rates. So people that are under mortgage stress, there's that potential to gain that extra second job or work those extra hours to compensate for that interest rate rise. Here you can see the statistics around the jobless rate, again, very low. Inflation, of course, inflation is a lot higher than the government would like to see, we would all like to see. There's a lot of shortages of product and labour hire over the last couple of years as we've come out of COVID. And that's led to most cost increases on most items that we buy and services as well. So again, but just remember in those periods of high inflation, property prices have still risen. Immigration is going to have a massive effect into Australia over the next few years. So the Australian government has approved 200,000 new permanent migrants into Australia in 2023, which is huge. And of course, these migrants have to go somewhere. So generally, they're attracted to the capital cities where they work, or they might have family or friends already residing there. They know the cities, these bigger cities, they know they will find work. So you generally see that international migration coming into the capital cities. What's surprising there is Queensland has got the strongest population growth in Australia. For those looking to continue to build their property portfolio in Queensland, that's a very strong statistic. Home building, we're currently building less homes than we have been over the last 2 years. So again, that shortage of property in Australia is only going to get worse. We've got massive population growth and less houses or new construction apartments being constructed. So again, it's just putting that pressure on the rental market and giving us as investors those higher returns, obviously. So looking at the home building approvals there down in most areas, and it's just putting more pressure on the current properties available to rent rates. So some of the lowest levels that we've seen. We can see it's not just houses, also inner city apartments now really coming on strong. A lot of new migrants into Australia going into those capital cities, more affordable to buy a unit than a house. And that's putting pressure on not only house prices or house rents, but also unit rents as well. The rental figures, again, very strong right across the country. Rents are still rising in most areas due to that limited supply. And over the last 12 months, massive rent increases. You can see Brisbane as an example there. House price rents have increased by 27% and units by 13%. And all the capital cities saw rent rises over the last 12 months. So of course we need to average these figures out. Month by month can be a little bit short term, but looking at those average rents over the last 12 months is strong. Vacancy rates is very surprising. Every capital city for houses at 1% or lower, which is extremely low. So we consider a 3% vacancy rate a pretty tight market. These markets are all around that 1% or under, so very shortage of property to rent. So looking back at what happened on property prices around Australia, and positive results for Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth as well. And we saw declines obviously in Sydney and Melbourne, but that was to be expected. Those markets have seen massive growth, about 300% capital growth over the last 10 years. So of course those markets were going to drop back. Those are the markets that have seen the strongest capital growth over the last sort of 3 to 5 years. But again, strong growth in Brisbane, Adelaide and Perth. Units outperformed houses in some parts of Australia. Again, they're that more affordable and more of that inner city living. And you can see house prices, when you average them out, are very strong. Again, we saw declines obviously in some housing markets last year, but when we go back the last 2 years, massive growth in every capital city right around Australia. And we talk about, again, as house prices fall, we read that those outlandish statements about home prices falling by 10 or 20%. So let's look at history. What's happened in the past? We've had a lot of economic and natural disasters, and you can see that when we go many years, there's been only 4 times where property prices have actually declined, and those declines have only lasted 12 months. So again, looking at holding property for the long term, you've got to average those gains out, and the biggest growth in 1 year was around that 5.5% Australia-wide. And looking back over the last 12 months, as we talked about, Sydney and Melbourne dropped back, and but some other markets were very strong, and those predictions again that were 10 to 20% of property prices falling were actually well off the mark. So again, it's taking that real information, looking at all the figures, and not one piece of data or one sensationalized news article in isolation. Dr. Andrew Wilson expecting some modest price declines at the start of 2023. There's currently less buyers around, there's a bit more stock available, and it's a really good opportunity for those looking to enter the market right now with that slight decline. But again, looking back at what's going to happen over the next 12 months, it's very interesting. And you see those markets again starting to increase. And over the last quarter, very small drops in many markets, but it was a very low percentage drop. And annual house prices, so going back over the last 12 months, again, still property price growth in Brisbane, Adelaide and Perth. Median prices still held up very well, and you're seeing the difference between Sydney and Melbourne compared to the other capital cities is quite large. So you see why that's, you can see the money on people buying property in those smaller capital cities as affordable, and getting better rental returns or yields as well, affordable, and still population growth in those areas. Our units have really performed well and expected to perform well over the next few years. And median house prices and unit prices, quite a significant difference between a house medium and a unit medium as well. There you can see the medium price for units there, probably well under the median house price. So what's going to happen more importantly going forward in 2023? According to the chief economist there, expecting some price fall, slight minimal fall early this year, and the market's starting to really recover later on this year. More importantly, we're still seeing growth, as I mentioned, Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, etc. And confidence is a big thing for the property market and what's going to happen going forward, and expecting good confidence, expecting capital growth over the next 12 months of somewhere of 4 to 7% for houses, and 4 to 8% for units right around Australia. So again, and that's about the average capital growth if you went back the last 20 or 30 years, around that 5 to 6%. So we're expecting fairly similar growth over the next 12 months, which is still very strong. Interesting report about the Gold Coast. We see a lot of these data reports, they focus on the capital cities, but the Gold Coast is one market that has really performed surprisingly well. And we don't see those results in most of the property market updates. So we're just going to have a look at the Gold Coast in particular, because it is a very strong market. And we look at the median house price compared to 12 months ago, and you can see a slight drop in the median house unit prices have actually increased over the last 12 months. Again, another surprising fact, but those are the numbers. 570,000 12 months ago in January, and currently 621,000 the median unit price. So again, surprising statistics. So that's why it's really important to focus on these real facts. And some of the suburbs around the Gold Coast, and seeing some slight price decline in some suburbs, and very strong capital growth in other areas. So you look at Coonabarra, Ormeau, very strong capital growth over the last 12 months in a market which hasn't had a lot of confidence, and we've had massive interest rate rise over the last 12 months. So when you consider that, that's a very strong confidence tick in the favour of the Gold Coast property market. Again, unit sales up in many suburbs around Australia. Rents, again, rents 12 months ago for units were $550, now $650. So $100 a week increase in median rents for units over the last 12 months is huge. House price rents have also increased dramatically. 12 months ago, it was $700 a week for an average house on the Gold Coast. January this year, it's now $800 a week. Yes, sure, our interest rates have gone up, but if you're looking for positive cash flow properties, this statistics will give you a bit of a guide where those areas to invest are. So again, rents by $100 a week on the Gold Coast over 12 months is massive. So that's well over 10% rent increase in units and house rents as well, very strongly. And that's expected to continue over the next few years as we see this migration growth going into Queensland. And we're not building enough new homes, as I mentioned earlier, and you can see the number of approvals as well down on what it was several years ago. So that's just adding to the property shortage. So that's pushing prices up and also pushing rents. So you can see why property prices and rents in the Southeast Queensland corridor have continued to rise when you look at the real facts. Immigration is going to be a big factor going forward. And you can see the Queensland population growth is very strong, 78,000 population growth into Queensland last year, and that was mostly due to interstate migration, but more importantly going forward, we're now going to see that international migration. That's going to be massive and putting further pressure on rents and property prices. Gold Coast economy, again, it's not often reflected in the market data, but the Gold Coast economy is going very strong, as you can see there. Jobless rate is about 3%. So the unemployment rate on the Gold Coast is probably the lowest it's been for many years. Auction clearance rates, we saw obviously a big decline in auction clearance rates. There was a massive move to auction sales when post-COVID, when there's that huge demand for property and the property market was really outside its normal cycle, and most property was going to auction and most property was selling at auction at or well above the reserve price. What we've seen in the last 12 months of that cooling property market is auction clearance rates have dropped, more private treaty sale, but we're starting to see a reverse of those lower auction clearance rates coming into the statistics now as well. So again, look at the data, look at the real fact. Auction clearance rates, again, those Sydney, Melbourne auction clearance rates around that 60 to 70%, which when you go back over the last 10 years average, is still very strong. Again, rely on the real facts. Sydney and Melbourne are used to auction clearance, properties going to auction. Those other markets of Brisbane, Adelaide and Canberra, they're less auction type cities, but still very good auction clearance rates on the day because they're attracting unconditional buyers, which is obviously less buyers than if you're going to a private treaty type sale. So Sydney is quite often when we see the facts in the paper and news articles, auction clearance related factor back to Sydney, but Sydney is just one part of the Australian property market. But again, very strong figures, 79% February last year when the market was very strong, still at 70% in this February. So still very strong auction clearance rates right now in Australia. Dr. Andrew Wilson has a property market update each Sunday morning. You can follow him on LinkedIn there, and I would suggest that you follow him. It's real good data, it's real data, and it allows us to make really good decisions on going forward in terms of the property market. So the summary, when we look at all those facts and figures, what does this really mean? We see the outlook for inflation increasing, as improving, so lower inflation as interest rates start to stabilise. We've got a booming national economy, so jobless, unemployment rates, historical low levels. We've got lots of income coming into Australia. Our resources are very strong in terms of price point, and that's only leading to protecting Australia. And we're doing very well when you look at the international worldwide economy. Australia's actually very well placed. Expecting house prices to increase, as I mentioned, interest rates to stabilise over the longer term. Underlying demand is still above supply, so there's still not enough property for rent or for sale to satisfy the growing demand, and that's only going to put further pressure on rents and property prices. And Dr. Andrew Wilson there forecasting house prices set to rise through all capital cities in 2023. So if you're sitting on the fence, not sure about whether you should be buying property or waiting, these facts and figures will tell you that waiting till the end of the year or later in the year is only going to cost you money. So you're going to be paying more for your property, according to these articles and reports and statistics, than you currently are. I hope that's really helped clear the picture in the terms of the property market. It's real information, allows you to make very good decisions. Dr. Andrew Wilson there saying misinformation, ignorance remains the curse of the Australian housing markets. We all hear the stories, I should have bought that property 3 years ago before COVID, I should have bought that property 10, 20 years ago, or now a lot of people have got that opportunity and are really sitting on the fence and waiting to see what's happening. But while that's happening, these smart investors and property homeowners are getting into the market before the next wave of demand. So I hope that's cleared up some questions there. I think it's a very good detailed report and information. I really wanted to bring it to my clients and show run, base your decisions on the real facts. I have downloaded this full report, so if you'd like to see a copy of the full report in all detail, please either email or contact me or text or phone call, and I'll send you the full report so you can really go through and analyse it. And some very exciting things happening in the property market going forward over the next few years due to this massive population growth and shortage of property, new construction going ahead. That's only going to be a good thing for rents and property prices. So I hope that's helped in some way making the decisions and giving you a broader view based on real facts, and look forward to seeing the next event. Thanks.